Captain Lee Minho stood on the bridge of the New Seoul, watching stars drift past the main viewing screen. The ship hummed quietly as it moved through deep space, far from Earth and farther from home than any human had ever traveled. 6 months into their mission to explore the outer rim of known space, the crew had grown used to the endless silence of the void. The New Seoul was humanity's pride and joy. A massive research vessel equipped with the latest technology, it carried 300 crew members and enough supplies for a 2-year journey. Its mission was simple in theory but complex in practice: find new worlds, make contact with alien life, and expand humanity's understanding of the galaxy. Captain Lee had been chosen for this mission because of his steady nerves and clear thinking, under pressure. At 42 years old, he had served in the Korean Space Force for 20 years, working his way up from a junior pilot to commanding officer. His crew trusted him completely, and he had never let them down. The bridge was quiet. That morning, when Communications Officer Park Yuna suddenly straightened at her station, her equipment began beeping rapidly, and strange symbols appeared on her screens. She had been monitoring deep space frequencies for months with no results, so the sudden activity made her heart race. "Captain," she called out, her voice tight with excitement. "I am receiving something unusual. It looks like a quantum transmission, but the pattern is unlike anything in our databases." Captain Lee walked over to her station and studied the scrolling data. The transmission was incredibly complex, far beyond anything Earth technology could produce. The signal strength suggested it came from somewhere very far away, possibly from outside their current star system. "Can you decode it?" he asked. Park Yuna worked frantically at her controls, running the signal through every translation program they had. "It will take time, sir. The signal appears to be some kind of mathematical language, but it follows patterns I have never seen before." Word spread quickly through the ship that they had received their first potential alien communication. Dr. Kim Tae-hyun, the ship's xenobiologist, rushed to the bridge along with Chief Engineer Choi So-min and several other senior staff members. Everyone gathered around Park Yuna's station, watching as she slowly unraveled the mysterious message. Hours passed as the communications officer worked to decode the transmission. She discovered that the signal used mathematical concepts as a universal language base, but the emotional undertones embedded in the patterns were desperate and urgent. Whatever was sending this message was in serious trouble. "I think I have something," Park Yuna announced after 6 hours of continuous work. The bridge fell silent as she activated the translation program. A synthetic voice began speaking in halting mechanical English. "To any species capable of receiving this transmission, we are the Valerian Republic. Our homeworld designation translates approximately to Crystal Garden. We face extinction, our people die, our children fade. We do not understand violence, we do not know war. We cannot fight. They consume us. Please help," the message repeated several times before cutting to static. The bridge remained completely silent as everyone processed what they had just heard. It was their first confirmed contact with alien intelligence, and it was a desperate cry for help. Dr. Kim Tae-hyun was the first to speak. "The translation mentions they do not understand violence or war. That suggests they evolved without predation or conflict. A completely peaceful species. What could threaten an entire planet that they cannot handle themselves?" asked Chief Engineer Choi So-min. Captain Lee studied the data on the screens. "Park Yuna, can you trace the source of this transmission?" The communications officer worked at her controls for several minutes before responding. "The signal originated from a star system approximately 8 months travel at maximum speed. The system designation in our charts is Kepler 442. It contains 7 planets, with the 4th planet showing signs of advanced civilization in our long-range scans." Dr. Kim pulled up stellar cartography data on his tablet. "Kepler 442 is at the very edge of our operational range. If we go there, we would not have enough fuel to return to Earth without resupplying somewhere." The implications were clear to everyone on the bridge. Responding to this distress call would be a one-way mission unless they could find resources in the alien system or make contact with other friendly species along the way. First Officer Young In-soo voiced what everyone was thinking. "We have no idea what we would be flying into. This could be a trap, or we might arrive to find nothing left to save. Captain Lee nodded thoughtfully. Those are valid concerns, but consider this. We are possibly the only species within range who has received this message. If we do not respond, these people will die. Security Chief Kang Do-yun stepped forward. Captain, what exactly do we know about fighting? Our ship has defensive weapons, but we are explorers, not warriors. Earth has been at peace for 50 years. Dr. Kim looked up from his research tablet. Actually, that might not be entirely accurate. Earth achieved peace, but only after thousands of years of constant warfare. Every human culture developed sophisticated military strategies, weapons technology, and combat psychology. We carry that evolutionary heritage with us. You think our violent past is an advantage? Asked Medical Officer Dr. Yoon Ji-ho. Consider the message again, Dr. Kim replied. They specifically said they do not understand violence and cannot fight. What if the threat they face requires exactly the kind of knowledge we spent millennia developing and then abandoned when we achieved global peace? Park Yuna continued analyzing the transmission data. Captain, I am detecting additional information embedded in the signal, technical specifications, star charts, and what appears to be tactical data about their attackers. She transferred the new information to the main screen. The data showed massive biological entities unlike any known spacefaring species. They moved in coordinated swarms and appeared to consume planets systematically, stripping away atmosphere and surface materials, before moving to the next target. Engineer Nam Hae-yoon studied the enemy specifications with growing alarm. These creatures show signs of adaptive technology. They modify themselves based on what they encounter. If they have been consuming other species, they may have absorbed those species' knowledge and capabilities. Captain Lee made his decision. Send a response to the Valerians. Tell them that the human expedition fleet has received their message and is coming to assist. Include our estimated arrival time and basic information about our capabilities. Sir, interrupted Chief Engineer Choi Soman. Once we commit to this course, there is no turning back. We will be risking the entire crew and the success of humanity's first deep space mission. The captain looked around at his senior staff. These were good people, trained professionals who had volunteered to travel farther from home than any human before them. They deserve to have a voice in this decision. I will not order anyone to participate in what might be a suicide mission, he said. We will put this to a ship-wide vote. Every crew member gets to decide whether we continue our exploration mission or respond to this alien distress call. The vote took place over the next 12 hours. Crew members debated in the mess halls, corridors, and workstations. Some argued they had a responsibility to complete their original mission and return safely to Earth with their discoveries. Others felt they could not ignore a species facing extinction when they might be able to help. When the votes were counted, the result was overwhelming. 273 crew members voted to answer the distress call, while only 27 voted to continue the original mission. Humanity had made its choice. As the new Sol changed course toward the Kepler 442 system, Captain Lee stood alone on the observation deck, watching the stars shift as they entered faster than light. Travel. He wondered what they would find when they arrived, and whether Earth's violent history would be enough to save a species that had never known conflict. Behind him, the ship prepared for war in ways its designers never intended. In 8 months, they would discover whether the death world called Earth had created the right kind of monsters to fight an enemy beyond imagination. 8 months later, the new Sol dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Kepler 442 system. What the crew saw through the main viewing screen made them gasp in horror. The outer planets were gone, reduced to floating chunks of dead rock. Massive debris fields drifted where moons had once orbited, and the space between planets glowed with an eerie green light. Captain Lee Min-ho felt his stomach drop as he realized the scale of destruction. Park Yuna, scan for any signs of life or active communications. The communications officer worked frantically at her station, her face pale as she processed the readings. Captain, I am detecting weak signals from the 4th planet, but everything else appears dead. The outer system has been completely stripped of organic matter. Dr. Kim Tae-hyun studied the sensor data with growing alarm. The debris patterns suggest systematic consumption rather than explosive destruction. Whatever did this took their time and harvested everything useful before moving on. Pilot Oh Sunwoo guided the ship deeper into the system, carefully avoiding the larger debris fields. As they approached the fourth planet, they could see that its surface had been scarred by massive excavations. Entire continents showed signs of strip mining, and the polar ice caps were completely gone. "There," pointed Security Chief Kang Do-yun. "Underground energy signatures on the main continent. Something is still alive down there," Captain Lee ordered the ship to enter orbit around the damaged planet. The surface looked like a mining operation had been abandoned halfway through completion. Huge mechanical structures sat silent among the excavated areas, and strange organic growth covered many of the abandoned sites. Park Yuna suddenly straightened at her station. "Captain, I am receiving a transmission from the planet's surface. It is using the same quantum frequency as the original distress call." The main screen flickered, and then displayed the image of the most beautiful creature any human had ever seen. The being appeared to be made of living crystal, with geometric patterns that shifted and changed color as it moved. Its voice was like wind chimes singing in harmony. "You came," the being said in perfect English, though its mouth did not move in sync with the words. "We did not believe anyone would answer our call across such vast distances. I am Elder Velthara of the Valerian Republic." Captain Lee stepped forward. "I am Captain Lee Minho of the human exploration vessel New Seoul. We received your distress call and came as quickly as possible. What is your current situation?" The crystal being flickered with what seemed like relief, mixed with sadness. "We are the survivors hiding in the deep crystal caverns beneath our capital city. Most of our people have been taken by the swarm. They come in waves, consuming everything in their path." Dr. Kim Tae-hyun moved to stand beside the captain. "Elder Velthara, can you tell us about these attackers? We need to understand what we are facing." The aliens' crystal form dimmed noticeably. "They are creatures of consumption and hunger. They arrived in our system 2 of your years ago and began with our outer colonies. We tried to communicate with them, to understand their needs, to offer peaceful coexistence. They did not respond to any of our attempts." Engineer Nam Hyun was studying her technical readings. "Elder, our sensors show massive organic structures throughout your system. Are these connected to the attackers?" "Yes," Velthara replied sadly. "They build feeding stations on each world they consume. The structures grow like living ships, processing everything they harvest. When a world is empty, they break apart and move to the next target." Chief Engineer Choi So-man felt a chill run down her spine. "How many worlds have they taken?" 12 colony worlds and 4 mining stations. Only our homeworld remains, and we estimate we have perhaps 2 of your months before they complete their current feeding cycle and return to finish us." The bridge crew exchanged worried glances. They had expected to find a battle in progress, not the final stages of a systematic extermination. Medical Officer Dr. Yoon Ji-ho stepped forward with the question everyone was thinking. "Elder Velthara, you said your people do not understand violence. Can you explain what that means exactly?" The crystal being seemed to struggle with the concept. "Violence is the intentional causing of harm to another conscious being. In 50,000 years of civilization, no Valerian has ever deliberately hurt another. We do not have concepts for war, weapons, or conflict. When we disagree, we reach harmony through resonant communication." Intelligence analyst Bae Ji-won looked confused. "But surely you must have some form of protection or defense systems." "Our technology is based on growth and creation," Velthara explained. "We can shape crystal structures, encourage plant growth, and harmonize energy patterns. But we cannot destroy or damage. Our minds simply cannot conceive of such actions." Security Chief Kang Do-yun found this hard to believe. "What about accidents? Natural disasters? Predatory animals? Our world was blessed with gentle evolution. No predators developed on Crystal Garden. Our weather patterns are stable and predictable. We have never faced threats that required defensive responses." The human crew began to understand just how different these aliens were from humanity. Dr. Kim Tae-hyun asked the next logical question. Have you tried to develop weapons or defenses since the attacks began? Elder Velthara's crystal form flickered, with distress. We have tried, but our attempts fail completely. When we try to imagine harming the swarm creatures, our minds become confused and unable to function. It is like trying to imagine a color that does not exist. We simply cannot process such concepts. First Officer Jung Insu studied the tactical displays. Can you show us recordings of the swarm attacks? We need to understand their methods and capabilities. The main screen changed to show crystal-clear recordings of the alien attacks. The swarm creatures were unlike anything in Earth databases. They looked like massive combinations of insect and machine, with organic hulls covered in technological components. They moved in perfect coordination, like drops of oil flowing across a surface. The recordings showed the creatures landing on Valerian colonies and immediately beginning consumption operations. They would extend tentacle-like appendages that drained not just physical matter, but seemed to pull energy directly from living beings. Plants withered and died in minutes. Animals collapsed and turned to dust. Even the Valerians themselves seemed to fade away when the tentacles touched them. Tactical Officer Ryu Gaon pointed at the screen. They are not just killing, they are harvesting. Look how they process everything systematically. The crew watched in horror as the recordings showed Valerians trying to communicate with the attackers. The crystal beings approached the swarm, creatures with open gestures, producing harmonic sounds that normally indicated peaceful intentions. The swarm ignored these attempts completely and continued their consumption process without pause. They do not see you as intelligent beings, realized weapons specialist Han Mingyu. To them, you are just another resource to be harvested. Elder Velthara confirmed this terrible assessment. We have tried every form of communication in our knowledge. Mathematical concepts, harmonic frequencies, emotional resonance patterns, even simple pictographs. They show no recognition of our intelligence or consciousness. Pilot O Sunwoo had been studying the technical data about the swarm ships. Elder, these creatures show signs of technological adaptation. Their ships incorporate elements from multiple species. Have they attacked other civilizations before reaching your system? Yes, Velthara replied with deep sadness. We detected the remains of at least 6 different technological signatures in their ship designs. They appear to absorb and integrate useful elements from each species they consume. The implications hit everyone on the bridge simultaneously. The swarm was not just destroying civilizations, they were learning from them and becoming stronger with each conquest. They had been doing this for a long time and had become very good at it. Dr. Yoon Ji-ho asked the medical question that everyone was dreading. Elder, what exactly happens to your people when they are taken? The crystal being dimmed to almost complete transparency before answering. They drain what you might call our life force, but it is more than that. They take our consciousness, our memories, our very essence. Those who are consumed do not simply die. They cease to exist in any meaningful way. Captain Lee felt anger building in his chest, an emotion that seemed to surprise Elder Velthara, who brightened slightly as if sensing something new and strange from the human captain. How many of your people are left? Captain Lee asked. Perhaps 50,000 survivors in the deep caverns. Our total population was once 800 million across all our worlds. The number was staggering, an entire civilization reduced to a tiny fraction of survivors hiding underground. Chief Strategist Shin Yunji stepped forward with the tactical question they all needed answered. Elder Velthara, do you have any defensive capabilities at all? Energy barriers, protective structures, anything that might slow down their attacks? Our crystal technology can create barriers, but the swarm creatures simply consume them like everything else. Our barriers make them stronger rather than stopping them. Engineer Nam Hyun had been quietly analyzing the swarm technical data. Captain, I am seeing something interesting in these readings. The swarm creatures appear to have difficulty processing. Intelligence analyst Bei Jiwan had not slept in 36 hours. She sat surrounded by screens displaying swarm behavioral data, empty coffee cups, and pages of handwritten notes. The more she learned about the enemy, the more terrified she became. Captain, She called across the research lab where the senior staff had gathered. I have been studying the attack patterns from all 12 consumed worlds. The swarm is not just intelligent, it is learning and adapting with each victory. Captain Lee Minho looked up from his discussion with Dr. Kim Tae-hyun. What do you mean by adapting? Bae Jiwon activated the main display screen, showing a timeline of the swarm attacks. Look at the first colony they hit versus the most recent. 1. The initial attack took them 6 months to fully consume the world. By the time they reached the 11th colony, they completed the same process in 3 weeks. Weapons specialist Han Mingyu studied the data with growing concern. They are getting faster and more efficient. But how? Each time they consume a species, they integrate that species' knowledge and capabilities into their collective consciousness. Bae Jiwon explained. The first colony had advanced crystal growing technology. The swarm absorbed that knowledge and now their ships can repair themselves using crystal formations. Dr. Kim Tae-hyun pulled up biological scan data on his tablet. I have been analyzing tissue samples that Elder Velthara provided from previous attack sites. The swarm creatures are not just eating biological matter. They are consuming and storing neural patterns. Neural patterns? Asked Medical Officer Dr. Yoon Ji-ho. Memories, learned behaviors, technical knowledge, even emotional responses. They are literally eating the minds of entire civilizations and adding that information to their collective database. Chief Engineer Choi So-min felt sick as the implications became clear. So every species they destroy makes them stronger and smarter. Exactly, confirmed Dr. Kim. And according to Velthara's data, they have consumed at least 6 different species before reaching the Valerian system. We are not fighting simple predators. We are fighting the combined knowledge and capabilities of multiple extinct civilizations. First, Officer Jung In-soo studied the tactical displays showing swarm ship movements. If they learn from every encounter, how do we fight something that will adapt to counter our strategies in real time? Weapons specialist Han Mingyu had been running combat simulations for hours. Our conventional weapons will work initially, but based on these patterns, the swarm will develop countermeasures within days of first contact. We need strategies they cannot adapt to easily. Engineer Nam Hyun looked up from her technical analysis. I have been studying the energy signatures from swarm feeding operations. There is something unusual about how they process consciousness. What kind of unusual? Asked Captain Lee. They appear to feed on ordered, structured thought patterns very efficiently. The more organized and logical a species is, the easier they are to consume. But I noticed some anomalies in the data from worlds where the attack slowed down. She transferred her findings to the main screen. Here, on the 7th colony world, the consumption process took much longer than expected. The swarm seemed to struggle with processing certain individuals. Dr. Kim examined the data carefully. What made these individuals different? According to the records, they were Valerians who had experienced trauma or psychological stress. Their thought patterns were chaotic and unpredictable compared to normal Valerian mental signatures. The research lab fell silent as everyone processed this information. Intelligence analyst Bae Jiwon was the first to understand the implications. The swarm feeds on consciousness, but it has difficulty digesting minds that have experienced suffering, conflict, or psychological trauma. Those mental patterns are too chaotic for their consumption process to handle efficiently. Dr. Yoon Ji-ho looked disturbed by the direction of this conversation. Are you suggesting that psychological damage makes someone inedible to these creatures? Not inedible, but much harder to process, explained Nam Hyun. Think of it like trying to eat food that has been mixed with sand. You can still consume it, but it takes much more effort and provides less nourishment. Captain Lee began to see where this analysis was leading. Human minds are shaped by millions of years of evolution on a hostile world. We have built-in psychological responses to danger, trauma, loss, and conflict. Our mental patterns would be extremely chaotic compared to a species that evolved without predation or violence, agreed Dr. Kim. We might be naturally resistant to their consumption process. Tactical Officer Ryu Gaeyeon had been quietly studying the swarm ship designs. There is something else. Look at how their ships are configured. Everything is optimized for efficiency, and coordination. They expect their enemies to behave predictably. She highlighted sections of the technical data on her screen. Their defensive systems are designed to counter energy weapons, kinetic projectiles, and coordinated fleet attacks. Standard military tactics that most civilizations would use. But they show no preparation for guerrilla warfare, psychological operations, or suicide attacks, realized Security Chief Kang Do-hyun. Concepts that require individuals willing to sacrifice themselves or act irrationally for strategic benefit. Chief Strategist Shin Yoonji had been taking notes throughout the discussion. So we have two potential advantages. Our minds are naturally resistant to their consumption process, and our military tactics are based on concepts they have never encountered. Potentially, cautioned Captain Lee. But we are still vastly outnumbered, and we have no idea how quickly they can adapt to completely new forms of warfare. The discussion was interrupted when Communications Officer Park Yuna received an urgent transmission from Elder Velthara on the planet's surface. Captain Lee, we have detected new swarm activity in the outer system. They appear to be returning ahead of schedule. The main screen switched to display sensor data from the Valerian underground monitoring stations. Massive biological signatures were moving through the debris fields of the outer planets, heading toward the homeworld. Pilot Oh Sun-woo calculated the trajectory and speed of the approaching ships. At their current rate, they will reach orbital position around the planet in 18 hours. How many ships? Asked Captain Lee. Elder Velthara's voice carried obvious fear. Our sensors detect 47 large vessels and countless smaller craft. It is the largest force they have ever assembled for a single world. Dr. Kim studied the sensor readings with growing alarm. They are bringing everything they have. This is not just another feeding operation. This is their final harvest of your system. Communications specialist Moon Hyejin had been monitoring swarm communication frequencies. Captain, I am detecting increased signal activity between the swarm ships. Their coordination is more complex than anything we saw in the historical data. They are planning something special for the homeworld, realized intelligence analyst Bae Ji-won. Probably because they know we are here. Captain Lee felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. They detected our arrival and decided to accelerate their timeline. We forced their hand. That might actually be good news, suggested weapons specialist Han Mingyu. If they are rushing their attack, they might not have time to plan for our unusual capabilities. Chief Engineer Choi So-man was already running calculations. Captain, we have enough weapons and ammunition for maybe 2 major engagements. After that, we would need to rely on whatever we can improvise using Valerian technology. Can their crystal technology be weaponized? Asked Security Chief Kang Do-hyun, engineer. Nam Hae-yun had been working on this problem for days. Possibly. Their growth-based systems could potentially be modified to create focused energy discharges, but it would require fundamentally changing how they think about their own technology. Elder Velthara's image flickered with distress on the communication screen. We cannot help you create weapons. Our minds still cannot process such concepts. When we try to think about harming others, our consciousness becomes confused and unable to function. Then we teach your people new ways to think, said Dr. Kim. Humans have techniques for psychological conditioning that might help you overcome those mental barriers. Is that possible? Asked Velthara with growing hope. Unknown, admitted Medical Officer Dr. Yoon Ji-ho. We would essentially be trying to give your species the capacity for violence and conflict. The psychological trauma could be severe. Captain, Lee made a command decision. We do not have time for extensive preparation. Elder Velthara, we need to begin evacuating your people from the underground caverns. Gather them in the deepest and most protected areas you can find. Where will you make your stand? Asked the Valerian leader. We will meet them in space before they reach your world, Captain Lee replied. 1 human ship against 47 swarm vessels. If we can damage or delay them enough, it might buy time for your people to escape or hide more effectively. First Officer Young In-soo looked at the tactical odds displayed on his screen. Captain, the mathematical probability of success is essentially 0. Mathematical probability never stopped humans before. replied Captain Lee with grim determination. We have 18 hours to prepare for the most impossible battle in human history. As the crew dispersed to their battle stations, intelligence analyst Bei Ji-won continued studying the 16 hours before the swarm fleet would arrive. Captain Lee Min-ho gathered his senior staff in the main conference room. The mood was tense but determined as they finalized their battle plans. Chief Strategist Shin Yoon-ji activated the tactical display showing their preliminary strategy. We have one advantage the swarm has never encountered before. Every species they have fought tried to preserve their own lives while defeating the enemy. Humans are willing to die to win. Security. Chief Kang Do-hyun nodded grimly. Suicide attacks are incomprehensible to a hive mind focused on efficiency and survival. They cannot calculate the tactical value of sacrificing resources for psychological impact. But we are not just talking about kamikaze runs, added Tactical Officer Ryu Gayan. Human military doctrine includes concepts like acceptable losses, strategic retreats that look like defeats, and feinting maneuvers designed to make the enemy waste resources. Weapons specialist Han Mingyu had been working with engineer Nam Hyun to modify their weapons systems. We have combined our kinetic projectiles with Valerian crystal growth technology. The results are devastating. He activated a test recording, showing their new hybrid weapons in action. The projectiles would penetrate enemy armor, and then trigger rapid crystal growth inside the target, literally tearing the swarm ships apart from within. The Valerians could never have imagined using their growth technology for destruction, explained Nam Hyun. But when we described the concept of controlled demolition, they were able to help us modify their systems. Dr. Kim Tae-hyun had made an even more disturbing discovery. I have been analyzing the psychological profiles of our crew members. Humans who have experienced trauma, loss, or extreme stress produce mental patterns that are actively toxic to the swarm consumption process. Toxic? How? Asked Medical Officer Dr. Yoon Ji-ho. When a human mind filled with rage, grief, or desperate determination comes into contact with the swarm neural network, it creates what can only be described as psychological poison. Instead of being consumed, our emotional states contaminate their collective consciousness. Captain Lee studied the data with growing interest. So our negative emotions can actually damage them? More than damage, replied Dr. Kim. Our capacity for hatred, fear, love, and sacrifice creates patterns that their hive mind cannot process. It is like introducing a computer virus into their collective consciousness. Communications Officer Park Yuna looked up from her monitoring station. Captain, I am receiving a transmission from the planet's surface. Elder Velthara says they have gathered some volunteers who want to help with the defense. The main screen activated to show a group of young Valerians who had been working with communications specialist Moon Hyejin to learn human concepts. They looked different from other members of their species, with darker crystal formations and less harmonious light patterns. These are Valerians who lost family members in the early attacks, explained Elder Velthara. Their grief has changed them. They are the first of our people who can think about conflict and revenge. One of the young Valerians, whose crystal form flickered with angry red light, spoke directly to Captain Lee. My name translates to Stormwalker. The swarm consumed my children and my mate. I want to learn how to make them pay for what they took from me. Dr. Yoon Ji-ho was concerned about the psychological implications. Elder Velthara, exposing your people to human concepts of warfare could cause permanent changes to their mental structure. Some changes are necessary for survival, replied the Valerian leader sadly. Stormwalker and the others have volunteered to let their minds be altered if it means they can fight back. Captain Lee made the decision. We will teach them what we can in the time we have. But understand, once you learn to think like humans, you cannot go back to pure harmony and peace. Combat engineer Wu Jihwan had been working on defensive preparations around the planet. Captain, we have placed improvised weapons platforms at strategic points throughout the system. They are designed to look like debris until activated. The platforms were a combination of human stealth technology and Valerian crystal camouflage. They would remain invisible to swarm sensors until the moment they opened fire, hopefully creating confusion in the enemy formation. Intelligence Analyst. Bei Jiwan presented her final analysis of swarm tactical behavior. They always begin attacks with reconnaissance drones to assess local defenses. Then they send in harvesting units, while their main battleships provide covering fire. Standard procedure for an efficient predator, observed First Officer Young. Insu. But what happens if we ignore their drones and immediately attack their main battleships? They would not expect that, replied Bei Jiwan. Most species try to preserve their forces by fighting the smaller units first. Directly engaging their primary assets would be seen as tactically insane. Perfect, said Captain Lee with a cold smile. Tactically insane is exactly what humans do best. Pilot Oh Sunwoo had been studying the navigation data for the upcoming battle. Captain, I can position our ship to look like we are retreating toward the planet's surface. When they pursue, we lead them into the weapons platform kill zone. The plan was beginning to take shape, but everyone knew it depended on perfect timing and incredible luck. They had one ship against an entire fleet, with improvised weapons and allies who had never fought before. Engineer Nam Haeun presented the final technical briefing. I have modified our engines to overload on command. If we ram their command ship, the explosion should take out several nearby vessels. That would be a one-way trip, observed Chief Engineer Choi Samin. All our trips are one-way at this point, replied Captain Lee. We came here to help the Valerians, and we are going to finish the job even if it costs us everything. The crew spent their final hours before battle in different ways. Some wrote messages to families back on Earth, knowing the transmissions would take years to arrive. Others meditated or prayed according to their personal beliefs. A few worked frantically on last-minute improvements to their weapons and defenses. Dr. Kim spent time with the Valerian volunteers, teaching them human concepts that their species had never needed before. He explained anger as a tool for motivation, fear as a warning system, and hatred as fuel for determination. Stormwalker proved to be a quick learner. I understand now why your species survived on a death world. These emotions are weapons that let you fight when logic says you cannot win. Exactly, confirmed Dr. Kim. When everything looks hopeless, humans get angry instead of giving up. When we are outnumbered, we fight harder instead of surrendering. When we should retreat, we attack instead. The young Valerian's crystal form pulsed with new understanding. You use your pain as strength. You turn your losses into reasons to keep fighting. Medical Officer Dr. Yoon Jiho was concerned about the psychological effects on both species. Dr. Kim, what we are doing to these Valerians is essentially giving them the capacity for trauma and conflict. Is that ethical? The alternative is extinction, replied Dr. Kim sadly. Sometimes survival requires becoming something different than what you were before. As the final hour approached, Captain Lee stood on the bridge watching the swarm fleet approach on long-range sensors. The enemy ships moved in perfect formation, their coordination flawless and terrifying. All stations report ready for battle, announced First Officer Young Insu. Communications Officer Park Yuna opened a channel to Elder Velthara on the planet's surface. Elder, we are about to begin the engagement. Keep your people in the deepest caverns until this is over. Captain Lee, replied the Valerian leader, your species has given us something we never had before, hope in the face of certain defeat. Whatever happens, we will remember that humans came when we called for help. And we will remember that the Valerians were worth saving. Captain Lee responded. The swarm fleet was now close enough for detailed scans. 47 massive biological ships, each one larger than the New Sol, accompanied by hundreds of smaller craft. Their hulls pulsed with organic life, and strange lights flickered beneath their surfaces. Weapons Specialist Han Mingyu reported final weapon status. All systems charged and ready. Crystal hybrid projectiles loaded, overload charges prepared. Tactical display shows optimal firing positions, added Tactical Officer Ryu Gayan. Pilot Oh Sunwoo had positioned the ship exactly where they needed to be for the opening move. Captain, we are in position to begin the attack run. Captain Lee, looked around at his crew. These were good people who had volunteered to explore the galaxy in the name of knowledge and discovery. Now they were about to fight humanity's first interstellar war against an enemy that had never been defeated. "All hands, this is the captain," he announced over the ship-wide communication system. "In a few minutes, we will engage an enemy that has destroyed entire civilizations. The odds against us are impossible, and we probably will not survive this battle." He paused, looking out at the approaching swarm fleet. "But we are humans, and impossible odds just make us angry. Today we teach the galaxy what happens when someone threatens innocent people within reach of Deathworlders. Today we show them what Earth's children can do when we stop playing nice." The bridge crew took their positions with calm determination. They had trained for this moment their entire careers, even though they never expected their first. The first volley of hybrid projectiles struck the leading swarm ships with devastating effect. Crystal formations erupted through their organic hulls, tearing massive holes in the enemy vessels. 3 of the largest ships began venting atmosphere and biological fluids into space. "Direct hits on primary targets," reported weapons specialist Han Mingyu, with fierce satisfaction. Their armor was not designed to handle internal crystal growth. But the swarm fleet's response was swift and coordinated. The remaining ships immediately changed formation, spreading out to minimize damage from future attacks. Their return fire lit up space with beams of sickly green energy. Pilot Oh Sun-woo threw the new Soul into a series of violent maneuvers that would have been impossible for most ships. "Evasive action. They are targeting our weapon systems." The enemy energy beams passed close enough to overload several secondary systems, but the main weapons remained operational. Captain Lee Minho watched as the swarm ships began adapting their tactics in real time. "They are learning from our first attack," observed intelligence analyst Bei Jiwan. "Look at how they are positioning themselves to avoid our crystal projectile impacts." "Then we stop using the same attack twice," replied Tactical Officer Ryu Gayan. Han Mingyu switched to conventional explosive rounds. "Let them adapt to those while we prepare something new." The battle continued with increasing intensity as both sides maneuvered for advantage. The swarm's superior numbers allowed them to surround the human ship, but their coordination became a weakness when pilot Oh Sun-woo began using unpredictable flight patterns. "They expect logical evasion maneuvers," Oh Sun-woo explained as he deliberately flew straight at a cluster of enemy ships before banking hard at the last second. Random behavior confuses their targeting systems. The improvised weapons platforms revealed themselves one by one, adding their firepower to the battle. Each platform was designed to fire a different type of weapon, forcing the swarm to constantly adapt their defensive measures. Combat engineer Woo Jae-won monitored the platforms from his control station. Platform 7 just took out 2 medium-sized vessels with the modified mining charges. Platform 3 is engaging their flanking force with crystal spear launchers. But the swarm was learning faster than expected. Within an hour of battle, they had begun to counter most of the human weapons. Their adaptive capabilities were more advanced than anyone had predicted. "Captain," called Chief Engineer Choi Soman from her damage control station, "we have lost main engines and half our weapon systems. Hull breach on Deck 5. We cannot keep this up much longer." The situation was becoming desperate when Communications Officer Park Yuna received an unexpected transmission from the planet's surface. "Captain, Stormwalker and his volunteer group are requesting permission to join the battle. They say they have prepared weapons based on human concepts." Captain Lee was surprised. "How can they help? We are fighting in space." Elder Velthara's image appeared on the communications screen. "Stormwalker has learned to weaponize our crystal growth technology in ways we never imagined. His group has created what they call revenge crystals." The young Valerian appeared beside the elder, his crystal form now pulsing with angry red and black patterns. "Captain Lee, we have grown crystal formations that can be launched at the swarm ships, but these crystals contain our grief and rage. When they make contact, they will poison the swarm collective consciousness." Dr. Kim Tae-hyun understood immediately. "They are creating psychological weapons, crystals infected with traumatic emotions that will contaminate the hive mind." "Can you reach the battle zone?" asked Captain Lee. Stormwalker gestured to something off-screen. We have modified our transport ships to carry our weapons into space. It will be a suicide mission, but we have learned from humans that sometimes dying for others is the most meaningful thing you can do. The moral implications were staggering. The Valerians were volunteering to sacrifice themselves using weapons concepts they had learned from humanity. They were becoming something completely different from what their species had been for 50,000 years. "Do it," ordered Captain Lee. "All units, provide cover for the Valerian volunteers." The New Soul and remaining weapons platforms concentrated, their fire on creating a corridor through the swarm formation. The enemy ships focused on destroying the human vessel did not immediately notice the small Valerian craft launching from the planet's surface. Stormwalker's voice came through the communications system as his group approached the battle zone. "Captain, we understand now why humans fight impossible battles. It is not about winning or losing. It is about refusing to let evil succeed without opposition." The Valerian volunteers flew their small craft directly into the heart of the swarm fleet. Their revenge crystals detonated in brilliant flashes of light, but the real damage was invisible. Each explosion sent waves of concentrated trauma and rage into the swarm hive mind. The effect was immediate and devastating. Swarm ships began moving erratically as their collective consciousness became contaminated with alien emotions. Their perfect coordination collapsed as individual ships struggled to process psychological patterns they were not designed to handle. "It is working," shouted intelligence analyst Bei Jiwan. "The hive mind is fragmenting. They cannot process the emotional contamination." Several swarm ships actually turned on each other, their compromised consciousness unable to distinguish friend from foe. Others simply stopped moving, their crews overwhelmed by the sudden experience of individual trauma and loss. But the victory came at a terrible cost. Stormwalker and all his volunteers had died in the attack, along with most of the weapons platforms, and half the crew of the New Soul. The survivors were badly damaged and running low on ammunition. Medical Officer Dr. Yoon Ji-ho worked frantically to treat the wounded, while Chief Engineer Choi So-man tried to keep the ship's critical systems operational. "Captain, we have maybe 10 minutes of life support remaining and no way to repair the main power systems." The remaining swarm ships were recovering from the psychological attack, their hive mind beginning to filter out the emotional contamination. Soon, they would resume their coordinated assault on the damaged human vessel. That was when psychological operations specialist Kim Yun-woo made a desperate proposal. "Captain, what if we amplify our own emotional states and ram their command ship? The psychological feedback from human minds at the moment of death might cause permanent damage to their collective consciousness." "You are talking about turning our deaths into weapons," said First Officer Young In-soo. "Exactly," replied Kim Yun-woo. "The swarm has never encountered beings who can weaponize their own mortality. Our final thoughts and emotions could poison their hive mind beyond recovery." Captain Lee looked around at his surviving crew members. They were exhausted, wounded, and facing certain death whether they fought or surrendered. But they were still human, and humans never gave up easily. "All hands, this is the captain," he announced. "We are going to ram the swarm command ship, set all systems to overload and prepare for final attack run." Engineer Nam Hae-yoon worked to maximize the coming explosion. "I have rigged the remaining crystal weapons to detonate when we make contact. The psychological and physical damage should be massive." As the New Soul began its final attack run, the crew focused their minds on everything they were fighting for. They thought about the Valerians who had trusted them to answer their call for help. They remembered Earth and the families waiting for them to return home. They felt anger at the injustice of entire species being consumed like cattle. The swarm. Ships tried to intercept the damaged human vessel, but pilot Oh Sun-woo had saved enough power for one last burst of speed. The New Soul accelerated toward the massive swarm command ship like a guided missile filled with human fury and determination. 10 seconds to impact," reported Oh Sun-woo calmly. "It has been an honor serving with all of you," said Captain Lee. The collision was visible from the planet's surface as a brilliant flash that briefly outshone the local star. The explosion destroyed both the human ship and the swarm command vessel, But the real damage was psychological. The concentrated emotions of 300 humans dying in defiant rage created a psychic shockwave that rippled through the entire swarm collective consciousness. Ships throughout the fleet began shutting down as their crews experienced individual terror, grief, and desperation for the first time in their existence. Elder Velthara and the surviving Valerians watched from their underground shelters as the swarm fleet began to dissolve. Some ships fled the system entirely, their crews no longer able to function as part of the collective. Others drifted powerlessly in space, their hive mind connections severed by psychological trauma. The immediate threat was over, but the cost had been enormous. Humanity's first deep space exploration mission had ended in the complete loss of ship and crew. The Valerians had been saved, but they had been forever changed by their exposure to human concepts of warfare and sacrifice. In the days that followed, Elder Velthara sent a quantum message toward Earth, though it would take years to arrive. The message carried news of the human crew's heroic sacrifice and a warning about the swarm threat that might still exist in other parts of the galaxy. But it also carried something else. The first alien testimony to human courage and the debt that one species owed to the Deathworlders who had answered their call for help. The survivors began rebuilding their civilization with new knowledge of both the darkness and light that existed in the galaxy. They had learned that peace sometimes required the capacity for war, and that some species were willing to die for strangers they had never met. The galaxy would never be the same after learning what humans were capable of when innocent lives were at stake. 3 months after the battle, Elder Velthara stood in the rebuilt crystal gardens of the Valerian capital city, but the harmonious structures now included darker formations that would have been unthinkable before the war. The survivors of his species were different now, forever changed by their exposure to human concepts of conflict and sacrifice. The young Valerian who had taken the name Honor Guard approached with news from the outer system monitoring stations. His crystal form still pulsed with the emotional patterns he had learned from humans, making him uncomfortable to be around for traditional Valerians. Elder, we have completed the analysis of the remaining swarm ships, Honor Guard reported. Most of their crews died from psychological shock when the human sacrifice shattered their hive mind. The few survivors have fled toward unknown regions of space. Elder Velthara nodded sadly. And what of our own people? How many have chosen to remain changed? 2,000 Valerians have retained the human emotional patterns they learned during the crisis. They say they cannot return to pure harmony after experiencing rage, grief, and the desire for vengeance. This was the tragedy that Elder Velthara had feared most. His species had been saved from extinction, but at the cost of their fundamental nature. The Valerians who had learned human concepts of warfare could no longer think in the peaceful, harmonious ways that had defined their civilization for 50 millennia. They have requested permission to leave Crystal Garden and establish a new colony, continued Honor Guard. They want to create a society that combines traditional Valerian growth technology with human defensive concepts. Elder Velthara approved the request, though it saddened him deeply. They are no longer truly Valerian, but they are also not human. They have become something new, shaped by contact with the Deathworlders. The conversation was interrupted by an urgent transmission from the Deep Space Monitoring Network. Communications Specialist Lightbringer, another Valerian who had been changed by the war, appeared on the crystal display screen. Elder, we are receiving multiple distress calls from star systems beyond our region. The signals are similar to our original call for help, but they come from different species. Elder Velthara felt his crystal form dim with concern. The swarm survivors are attacking other worlds? No, Elder. These are different threats entirely. Energy parasites attacking the ethereal collective. Mechanical viruses consuming the silicon. Confederacy. Reality distortion entities threatening the Dreamweaver Empire. The implications were staggering. The galaxy contained multiple extinction-level threats, and peaceful species throughout known space were being destroyed by enemies they could not comprehend or fight. Are any of these species sending the distress calls toward Earth? Asked Elder Velthara. Honor Guard consulted his data displays. Several of them have detected and copied our original quantum transmission methods. They are broadcasting calls for help in all directions, hoping someone will answer. Elder Velthara made a decision that would have been impossible for his species before the war. Send a message toward Earth space. Tell them about these distress calls and ask if humanity is willing to help other species facing extinction. Elder asked Lightbringer with concern. Are you sure we should encourage the humans to fight more battles? We saw what the cost can be. The cost of human help is high, admitted Elder Velthara, but the cost of not having it is extinction. These threatened species deserve the same chance we received. The quantum message was transmitted toward Earth, though it would take over 4 years to reach the human homeworld. The message carried detailed information about the various threats facing different species, along with Elder Velthara's personal testimony about human capabilities. While they waited for a response that might never come, the Valerians began studying the wreckage of the New Sol and the destroyed swarm ships. The technological fusion of human engineering and Valerian crystal growth had created weapons more effective than either species could have developed alone. Dr. Crystal Mind, a Valerian scientist who had learned human research methods, made breakthrough discoveries in the debris fields. The human psychological patterns have permanently altered our crystal matrix structures. We can now grow formations that store and project emotional energy. This discovery led to the development of what the changed Valerians called empathy crystals. These formations could store the emotional experiences of individuals and transfer them to others, allowing peaceful species to understand concepts like courage, sacrifice, and righteous anger without experiencing trauma directly. We can teach other species to think like humans when necessary, explained Honor Guard to Elder Velthara. They can learn to fight for survival without losing their fundamental nature permanently. The first test subjects were volunteers from their own population. Traditional Valerians who had remained unchanged were given temporary exposure to stored human emotional patterns through the empathy crystals. The results were remarkable and disturbing. I can feel their anger, reported one volunteer after exposure to stored human battle emotions. It burns like fire, but it also gives strength. I understand now why they chose to die fighting instead of accepting peaceful extinction. However, the psychological effects were intense and sometimes harmful. Several volunteers required extended healing periods to recover from the alien emotional experiences. Elder Velthara realized they had discovered something that could save other species, but only at significant cost. 2 years after the battle, a damaged alien ship entered the Valerian system. The vessel belonged to the chorus singers, a species of musical beings whose homeworld was being consumed by sound-eating parasites. Their desperate captain, who called himself Harmony of Sorrow, begged for help. We heard rumors of a species that defeated the great devourers, Harmony of Sorrow sang in patterns of desperate hope. We seek the warriors who taught peace lovers to fight. Elder Velthara felt the weight of responsibility. The humans were gone, but their legacy remained in the changed Valerians and the knowledge they had left behind. The human warriors died in our defense, but they left us their methods and their understanding of warfare. Honor Guard stepped forward, his crystal form now bearing permanent scars from learning human concepts. We can teach your people what the humans taught us, but the price is high. You will learn to feel emotions that your species was never meant to experience. The negotiation took weeks, but eventually Harmony of Sorrow agreed to the psychological conditioning. A small group of chorus singers volunteered to receive temporary human emotional patterns through the empathy crystals. The transformation was difficult to watch. The musical beings, who had expressed themselves through pure harmony for millions of years, learned to sing songs of rage and defiance. Their beautiful voices took on harsh undertones as they absorbed concepts of hatred and revenge. But it worked. The modified chorus singers returned to their homeworld with weapons grown from Valerian technology and powered by human emotional patterns. They drove off the sound-eating parasites in a series of battles that their species had never imagined possible. Word of the victory spread throughout the galaxy through quantum communication networks. Other threatened species began making the long journey to the Valerian system, seeking the same help that had saved 2 civilizations. Elder Velthara found himself managing what the changed Valerians called the Crisis Response Center. They had Become the galaxy's first specialists in teaching peaceful species how to survive extinction-level threats. We are not warriors like the humans were, Elder Velthara explained to each new group of refugees, but we can share what they taught us about fighting when fighting becomes necessary. The most difficult case came when representatives of the Eternal Garden Collective arrived. Their species existed as living ecosystems, with individual consciousness, distributed across entire forests. They faced destruction by entropy accelerators, weapons that aged entire star systems to death in days. "How do you teach a forest to hate?" asked Tree Speaker, their representative. "How do you give an ecosystem the desire for revenge?" This challenge required innovations beyond anything the Valerians had attempted before. Working with the changed members of their species, they developed macro-empathy crystals capable of projecting human emotional patterns across planetary scales. The process took months and required the cooperation of entire continents on the Garden Collective worlds. Slowly, the living ecosystems learned to experience anger, determination, and the willingness to sacrifice parts of themselves to preserve the whole. The transformed Garden Collective developed biological weapons that accelerated entropy in return, creating zones of rapid aging around their attackers. The entropy accelerator machines, DZIG,